Hi, it's Laura again, and I have part 3 of our 3-part trifocal HR frame recording. So this time we're going to talk about the medical, clinical, or organismic view of an organization. This third one tends to look at organizations as if they were a person, and specifically oftentimes to look at that person as if the organization is a patient. So in addition to looking at the medical clinical piece, to also look, just like people, that organizations have developmental stages that affect them in terms of where they are in their life cycle. So self-concepts like life stories and languages and health status are also taken into account in an organization's life cycle. And then one of my favorite authors, and another one that I don't know much about. So one of them is Manfred Ketz de Vries, and another author named Miller, tend to think of dysfunctional organizations in terms of abnormal psychology. Here's where the medical and clinical part of the lens comes in. That we tend to have organizations that are paranoid. We tend to have depressive organizations. We tend to have schizoid organizations. And sometimes, if you will, organizations can also be crisis prone. So sick organizations, like sick individuals, may not perceive themselves as needing help. Perhaps you are familiar with one of these. Whoops, I went back too far. Well, I went back to the correct one now. So here's a graph that shows sometimes what happens in organizations through the life cycle, that foundations built, and after a while norms start to emerge in an organization. As the organization continues to succeed, its values tend to align with the actions. The workforce tends to be pretty cohesive, if you will. Also, this is an individual almost getting to an adult stage. And as the organization matures, the stability may also turn into complacency, where organizations tend to decline. Highly bureaucratic organizations also become very chaotic, and the values and actions tend to get out of alignment. So in the longer years, as the success fades away, organizations either need to revamp or they tend to bust. So they can go back into sustained growth, they can continue along with bare existence, or they go into extinction. So like individuals, organizations also tend to have a high infant mortality. I guess not like individuals, but if you think about the number of businesses or organizations that last past 5 years, there's just not that many of them. Here's another organizational life cycle that Kim and Cameron talked about, and specifically I think this is actually Larry Greiner's work. So he says the smaller organizations is on the bottom and the large ones on the top. So as organizations go through their life cycle, they tend to be very creative in an entrepreneurial stage. And then what Greiner says is they tend to hit these crises modes as they get older. So the first crisis mode that happens is that they may need leadership, some really stable leadership. And if they can get past that crises, then they can go on and really have a clear direction. They can perform very well. And then they hit a crisis that they need delegation with control in it. And if they can get past that, then they have an additional internal systems, which ends up to be too much red tape or too much bureaucracy, if you will. So that crisis hits, and if they can get past that crisis, then they can really develop teamwork. They may need to hit that crisis again for revitalization, and that's when decisions are made of streamlining, so they may go back to small company thinking. They may continue at some kind of maturity level, or they may decline. I think this is this is a table, if you will, instead of a graph, but it looks, it takes into account that organizations, as with most systems, go through life cycles. The features of new organizations tend to be markedly different from older or even larger organizations. So this table kind of summarizes what happens at birth. in a small organization or medium. And as organizations grow larger, we can see at birth and small organizations, they tend to be non-bureaucratic. And then the smaller organizations tend to stay non-bureaucratic as the larger organizations or medium-sized tend to get into pure bureaucracy, pre-bureaucracy during their youth stage, and bureaucratic during midlife, and then very bureaucratic as they get older. At birth, the centralization usually is one-person rules because organizations start small. As organizations get bigger and older, 2 leaders tend to rule, and then we get to midlife, 2 department heads, and the maturity often looks pretty top management heavy. Again, you can see the progression through formalization with no written rules, a few rules as organizations grow. Policy and procedure manuals come in during midlife, and then these policies and procedures manuals become very extensive and formalized as the organization matures. So something else to look for in the office. Where are they? Coming back to the concept of the margin equation, if you remember that we all have resources, and takeaway from resources are the load that we all carry, and we end up either in positive or negative margin. Just like individuals, organizations also have margin. So their resources are their capacity in which to meet demand that's given them. The resources are capacity, the load is the demand. If an organization stays in negative margin over a long period of time, Alvin Toffler wrote about this, it's called future shock. But organizations, when they are in negative margin for a long period of time, oftentimes collapse. They go into bankruptcy, or they make a voluntary fundamental change, just like individuals, that organizations may decide to no longer produce a certain item, or they reduce the load by downsizing the company or subcontracting out. So future shock, this long-term operating in a negative margin, ends up that in terms of volume, it's the number of changes that we face in organizations that starts to increase. The momentum, so the speed, we have less and less adjustment time before the next change comes along. And then complexity, the availability of problem-solving solutions to solve those problems, they get more complex because the problems get more complex and it's harder to solve those problems. So organizations need to keep and take into account where they are in terms of margin, whether they're in positive or negative margin. And positive margin, we all know also, is that the slack resources that we have to build and grow and move on. My main study, or research area, if you will, is about organizational health. And organizational health is the presence of active and valued healing processes which continually repair and prevent serious organizational injury and disease. So remember, as we're talking about organizational health in this manner, we're looking at the organization as an organism. Process tends to be pretty complex and fragile. So organizations are susceptible to interruption or failure that leads to, if we have an injury in an organization, it could lead to a wound that won't heal. So a non-healing chronic wound, if you will. Highly dysfunctional organizations tend to be controlling, rigid, and exclusive, or very fuzzy, confusing, and boundary-free. Either extreme leads to organizational dysfunction and tends to enslave people in different ways. Perhaps you know one of these. I have a long list for you here that I'm not going to take a whole lot of time to cover, but wanted to just go over these quickly with you. So these are 17 syndromes of organizational dysfunction. And I want to remember to also upload this so you can read through these. And you may see these in the office. You may see these in a place where you work. So one organizational dysfunction is ADD, or attention deficit disorder, that senior management can't seem to focus on a primary goal or strategy long enough to gain momentum. They're all over the place, and so others end up being all over the place. Anarchy, when the bosses won't lead. So a weak and divided or distracted executive team fails to produce the clear sense of direction, momentum, and goal that's needed for the organization to move forward. Anemia, so only the dead word survives, that the people that have functioned really well and carry the organization are long gone. So what's left are the people that haven't gone anywhere, and nor have they been those doers and shakers. A caste system, it's the anointed and the untouchables. Actually, universities tend to be very caste-like because faculty fall in one area, staff, administration, and they appear on the organizational chart. They don't appear on the organizational chart, but they do dominate the collective behavior that we carry out every day. So Civil War, this is a contest of ideologies. So who can provide more power to the mega camp, if you will, and outdo other subcultures? Despotism, I think that's how you pronounce it. I've looked it up before and then I forgot it again. So the fear and trembling. So this is perhaps a tyrannical CEO or somebody that is a supervisor tends to really come down on other people, and so it leaves people with no psychological safety to do their job. Then there's a fat, dumb, and happy. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And oftentimes the economy moves on, and there's no sense of urgency to reinvent businesses. General depression, so we have nothing to believe in, and we're just going to mope around and continue along that line. And then there's geriatric leadership. So these are people that have retired on the job, or are planning to retire a year down the line, but for whatever reasons, the leadership is there physically, but not doing a job well. Number 10 is the loony CEO. So crazy makes crazy. When a top person tends to be a little bit nutty, then that also filters down and out. There's a malorganization, is kind of a structural arthritis. So this is when the architecture structure works against the achievement of the mission, so it's not aligned very well. People don't know the mission, but there is a different, they may know their mission, but the structure isn't put in place to do that. The monopoly mentality is our divine right, so we've enjoyed a dominant position and we don't want to give it up or share. The one-man band, I think this one is funny, the Clint Eastwood rules. So kind of having a cowboy-type CEO who feels no need or responsibility to share his or her master plan with subordinates. The cowboy shall ride off into the sunset. Then there's the rat race, the idea that those that be in power tend to move the cheese around a lot, and people don't really know where to put their efforts. And then there's the silos, both cultural and structural, that the organization tends to disintegrate into isolated camps that don't talk to one another. Testosterone poisoning, the men will be boys. These happen in male-dominated industries or organizational cultures, sometimes military units, law enforcement agencies. So the idea it's male-dominated or boys will be boys, and so we forgive them for doing whatever it is that they do. And then the welfare state, which is why in the heck should we work so hard? I have another quick list of indicators of organizational decline. So this is by Lorraine and Nelson. So from excess personnel, tolerance of incompetence, too much staff power, replacement of substance with form, fear of embarrassment, conflict. So these are all indicators of organizational decline. My time is out. Thank you so much for your time.